Tempest was quiet in the way a living kingdom is quiet, never truly silent, only resting between heartbeats. Lantern light moved across streets that had once been mud paths. The smell of broth and forged smoke drifted together like a promise. Even the wind seemed to speak a language Rimuru understood, because he had written that language into the land with years of patient choices. He stood above it all, not on a throne, but on a balcony that looked out over roofs, rivers, and the distant line of forest. Below, people laughed without checking the sky for omens. They argued about trade routes, not survival. They planned festivals. They built schools. In another world, such small things would be beneath a demon lord. Here they were the point of everything. Rimuru Tempest had become a contradiction that held. A slime who had devoured dragons and diplomacy alike. A ruler who could crush nations, yet spent more time wondering if the new bakery had enough flour for winter. His strength had stopped feeling like a weapon and started feeling like a responsibility that never slept. On nights like this, the past returned in soft, strange flashes. The moment he had awoken as a formless creature and learned hunger. The first time he understood fear. The first time he understood trust. And then the long ascent, the gathering of names, the birth of a nation, the day the world itself acknowledged him as something beyond mortal measures. It would have been easy, perhaps, to become distant, to let myth replace empathy. Yet Rimuru never managed to forget how cold it felt to be nameless. That was why he kept experimenting, not for conquest, not for escape, for connection. The same urge that made him build bridges between species made him wonder about bridges between worlds. The multiverse had always whispered around the edges of magic, and now, with Ciel at his side, those whispers had begun to sound like maps. In the chamber behind him, complex circles glowed with restrained light. The air smelled faintly of ozone and herbs, like a storm trapped in a jar. This was not summoning, not teleportation, not the crude tearing of space that desperate mages attempted. This was refinement. A gentle hand placed against the wall of reality, listening for the hollow places. Ciel's presence was a clarity inside him, calm and precise. The calculations are stable, Ciel observed. Dimensional resonance remains within acceptable range. Probability of collapse is minimal. Minimal, Rimuru repeated, amused by the word. In his life, minimal probabilities had a habit of becoming the story. He stepped into the circle anyway. If he had learned anything, it was that peace was not maintained by resting. Peace was maintained by understanding what could threaten it before it arrived with teeth bared. He extended his senses outward. Space felt like fabric. Time felt like current. Between them there were seams. He touched one. The circle responded, lines brightening, symbols turning like slow gears. For an instant it felt beautiful, like standing at the edge of an ocean made of possibilities. Then the ocean looked back. It was subtle at first, a vibration in the bones of the magic, a discordant note that did not belong. Ciel's calm sharpened. External interference detected. Unknown energy signature. Rimuru's eyes narrowed. He had expected resistance from worlds with guardians, from laws of nature, from jealous gods. What he felt was different. It was not a wall. It was a mouth. The circle did not open into a distant landscape. It opened into a bruise. The heresy. Not like paper, but like skin pulled apart. The room darkened as if light itself had become afraid to remain. A pressure pressed in from nowhere and everywhere. The symbols on the floor began to distort, bending toward the wound as though reality were being poured into it. Rimuru's first impulse was to shut it down. A command form. Too late. The resonance caught. The tear widened with a hunger that was not physical. It felt like a thought, vast and predatory, seizing on his magic the way a drowned man seizes a rope. The chamber warped. The palace walls stretched and snapped into impossible angles. Sound turned into a distant echo, then vanished. And for the first time in a long time, Rimuru felt something he did not immediately understand. Not fear. He had faced fear, not pain. He had endured pain. This was something colder. The tear did not hate him. It did not even want him. It simply swallowed, because swallowing was what it did. It was a universe that did not care how kind you were, how strong you were, how righteous your intentions were. It was a universe that would grind saints and monsters alike into the same dust, and never pause to ask which was which. He fell through. There was no sensation of movement, only the sensation of being removed from all familiar coordinates. Colors appeared that were not colors, emotions shaped like geometry, whispers that tasted like iron. His body, usually so adaptable, trembled as if each cell had become aware of a new rule and did not like it. Ciel's voice came again, more urgent now. This space is saturated with conceptual contamination. It resembles an astral layer but is vastly more hostile. Designation pending. Rimuru reached for his usual anchors. The awareness of allies, the sense of land, the faint warmth of Tempest's collective life. He found nothing. He was alone in a place that felt like an ocean of hostile dreams, where thoughts were predators and predators were prayers. Then the whispers became words. They slid into his mind as if his mind were a door left ajar. Questions disguised as invitations. Little king, little god, you are bright. You are unfinished. Come closer. Rimuru tried to seal his consciousness. The whispers laughed, not because he was weak, but because the act of sealing was itself a flavor they enjoyed. This realm did not merely observe the mind. It fed on it. His body began to register new sensations. The air, if it could be called that, was thick with something that wanted to become him. The pressure of it pushed at the boundaries of his identity, searching for cracks. Ciel's analysis accelerated. Energy classification warp-like phenomenon. Nature psychoreactive. Threat, mimetic and spiritual corrosion. Countermeasure in progress. Warp, Rimuru repeated internally, tasting the concept. A sea of emotion made real. A dimension where belief carried weight. Where despair could become weather and hope could become a beacon. In his world, magic had rules. In this place, the rules were shaped by hunger. Something vast moved beneath the surface of the dark. Not a creature, but a presence, like a continent shifting underwater. The whispers grew louder, the pressure tighter. Rimuru realized, slowly, why this felt different from any demon realm he had faced before. Demons in his world wanted things. They had aims, even if twisted. They could be bargained with, outwitted, defeated. This place did not bargain. It consumed. The darkness around him rippled and shapes began to coalesce, silhouettes made of malice and thought. Eyes like burning punctuation marks. Smiles too wide, too knowing. Limbs that ended in blades or hands or nothing at all. Demons, he thought. The word arriving with certainty he had not earned. They circled him as if he were a rare scent drifting into a starving city. And for the first time since he had become a god, for the first time since power had become as natural as breathing, Rimuru felt truly measured. Not by an enemy's strength, by a universe's cruelty. His kindness, he understood, did not register here as virtue. It registered as vulnerability. Mercy was a scent. Compassion was light. And in this place, light attracted teeth. He steadied himself. His mind did not race. It cooled. If this was a universe built on suffering, then he would need to learn its language before he could speak back to it. He looked into the warp, and the warp looked into him. The first demon drifted closer, moving like smoke given intention. It did not rush. It savored. In the warp, predation could afford to be ceremonial, because time was a suggestion and pain was a currency. It spoke without sound, a thought pressed against Rimuru's awareness. You are soft. You are bright. You will break beautifully. Behind it, other shapes stirred, gathering like sharks sensing blood. Some wore the masks of nobility, draped in impossible finery that fluttered in non-existent wind. Others were swollen and leaking, halos of flies forming crowns. Some were lean and armored, their rage so dense it bent the air around them. And in the far distance there were patterns, shifting and reforming, as if the concept of scheming had taken a breath and become an environment. They did not agree with one another. They did not need to. For now they agreed on him. Rimuru's body registered the first touch of warp energy. It was not heat or cold. It was meaning. It tried to rewrite him, to tell his cells that despair was more true than life, that hunger was more honest than peace. In his own world, corruption had always been a force that could be purged, resisted, sealed. Here, corruption was the water itself. Ciel's voice cut through the pressure like a blade of clean light, initiating adaptive defense, converting conceptual intrusion into analyzable data, beginning integration of psycho-reactive principles into internal magic system. Rimuru almost smiled. Of course, Ciel would treat the impossible like a puzzle. The demons leaned closer, expecting panic, expecting rage, expecting the delicious first crack of a mind realizing it was outmatched. Instead, Rimuru watched them like a scientist observing a storm. "They are talking to me," he noted. "They want a response." He understood why. The warp fed on emotion. A scream was a feast. A desperate prayer was a banquet. Even hatred could be harvested. So Rimuru gave them something else. Stillness. He let his mind become a lake at dawn. Thoughts moved, but quietly. Curiosity, not fear. Assessment, not despair. The warp pushed harder, searching for turbulence it could ride. Ciel continued. "Warp energy is reacting to your emotional state. Emotional neutrality reduces contamination vectors. Recommend maintaining calm." So that was the trick. In this universe, the soul could become an open wound if it bled feelings too loudly. Rimuru had once thought of compassion as strength. Here compassion might be a beacon in shark-infested waters. A demon of excess slid forward, its form both alluring and repulsive, a perfection that hurt to look at. It offered a vision pressed into Rimuru's senses. Tempest burning, his friends screaming. The only way to save them, the vision whispered, was to accept power. More power. A throne built of surrender. Rimuru felt the tug, not because he believed it, but because the image of his people suffering always struck something deep. He acknowledged the emotion. Then he let it pass. "No," he replied, and the word carried no anger. "If Tempest is threatened, I will protect it, but I will not trade myself for a lie." The demon recoiled slightly, confused. It expected bargaining. It expected craving. It expected a hook. It found none. A bloated demon of decay lumbered closer, its presence rotting the space around it. Flowers withered in air that did not exist. It extended a hand and offered comfort, the false kindness of surrender. Let go. Become part of the cycle. Stop struggling. Nurgle's embrace was always framed as mercy. The warp around Rimuru thickened, trying to make his very concept of self feel exhausted. Ciel adjusted, deploying internal purification loop. Rewriting decay vectors as harmless entropy, integrating immunological adaptation at metaphysical level. Rimuru's slime body shifted, subtle at first, then with sudden clarity. The rotting pressure touched him and found no purchase. What was meant to turn him into compost became data, absorbed and neutralized, like poison turned into medicine. The demon of decay tilted its head, genuinely puzzled. It had never met a victim that learned the poison faster than it could be administered. A sharp presence cut in next, a pattern of ever-changing symbols, eyes like spinning sigils. T. Sanchez's emissary did not tempt with pleasure or comfort. It tempted with understanding. It showed Rimuru 1,000 branching futures, each one ending in a different ruin. It whispered that no choice mattered, that all choices were already manipulated, that the only way to win was to become the manipulator. Rimuru watched the futures like lanterns floating on a river. "Interesting," he said quietly, "but you are still trying to steer me." He reached out with his own analysis, not magic, not emotion, but pure comprehension. Beginning reverse mapping of warp probability currents. Extracting causal anchors. Calculating anti-manipulation field. The future shuddered. For the first time, the patterns hesitated. In the warp, schemes fed on ignorance and arrogance. Rimuru offered neither. He offered a mind that could adapt without ego, because he did not need to be the smartest. He only needed to keep learning. Then the rage arrived. A roar that was not sound but impact. Khorne's presence surged like a tidal wave, and the demons around it gave way as if instinctively recognizing a superior predator. A warrior shape formed, all blades and armor, its essence screaming for violence. It did not speak. It did not bargain. It simply attacked. The strike should have been impossible to block. In the warp, violence was not constrained by mass or momentum. It was an idea sharpened. The blade came down with the weight of 1,000,000 battles. Rimuru raised an arm. The impact rippled through him, scattering his form, tearing his surface into fragments of liquid light. For a breath, he looked destroyed. Then the fragments swirled back, reknitting faster than the rage could celebrate. Ciel's voice was calm again. Damage assessed. Integrating warp impact mechanics. Reinforcing structural integrity with conceptual inertia. Countermeasure ready. Rimuru's body hardened, not into steel, but into the idea of unbreakability. The next blow landed and sank into him like a sword into deep water, slowed, absorbed, rendered meaningless. The warrior demon paused. Rimuru met its gaze. "You can hit harder," he said, almost apologetic. "But I will keep learning." That was when the warp itself seemed to react. Not the demons. The sea beneath them. Something vast shifted as if the attention of a god had turned. The pressure changed, becoming more focused, more curious, more hungry. The chaos gods, distant and immense, felt something they did not often feel. A being in their domain who did not break when touched. A soul that did not rot when offered comfort. A mind that did not twist when shown secrets. A heart that did not surrender when tempted. A creature who could learn faster than they could corrupt. Rimuru felt their attention like four suns rising behind storm clouds. He could not see them, not directly, but he could sense their silhouettes in the tides of the warp. He realized then that his true weapon was not raw power, though he had plenty. It was adaptation without desperation, evolution without ambition, a growth that did not seek domination, only survival and protection. The demons circled him again, but the tone had changed. Less playful, more cautious. They were no longer sure he was prey. And somewhere deep in the warp, the thing that had swallowed him began to consider whether it had swallowed something that would change the taste of the ocean itself. The warp released him like a throat, deciding it did not like the texture. Rimuru fell, not through space, but through layers of pressure, and then he was suddenly in air that obeyed physics again. Gravity caught him. Cold wind hit his face. Ash stung his senses. He landed without sound on cracked ferrocrete, the impact softened by instinctive control. For a moment he simply stood, letting his awareness spread. The sky above was the color of old bruises, smeared with smoke and distant fire. Towers rose like broken teeth, their upper levels lost in haze. A hive world vast beyond reason, stacked lives upon lives until the weight of humanity became architecture. And it was dying. Sirens wailed somewhere far below, not in organized warning but in frantic, overlapping screams of machinery. Gunfire crackled like insects. Explosions rolled through the city with the slow rhythm of a giant's heartbeat. Rimuru felt the presence of fear, not as a single emotion but as an atmosphere. Millions of minds packed into metal and stone, all pressing against the same desperate question. Why is this happening again? He moved to the edge of a shattered roadway and looked down. Below, a river of people surged through narrow streets. Men and women in stained work clothes, children carried on shoulders, old bodies dragged along by younger arms. Faces gray with dust, eyes wide with the empty focus of those who have learned that panic wastes breath. Behind them, shapes move, not human shapes. Demons skittered across walls and ceilings, their bodies made of wrong angles and hunger. Cultists ran among them, faces painted, mouths chanting words Rimuru did not understand but could feel in his bones. The chant made the air vibrate, a rhythm that pulled at reality, widening invisible cracks. Guardsmen held a line in a ruined plaza. Their armor was battered, their lasguns flickering with heat. They fired in disciplined bursts, but discipline was a thin shield against the unnatural. Each time a demon fell, it dissolved into smoke and laughter, only to reform elsewhere. Each time a guardsman fell, he did not rise again. Rimuru watched one soldier, a young man with blood on his cheek, screaming for a retreat that was not coming. A commissar stood behind him, pistol raised, eyes like iron. In Rimuru's world, leaders fought beside their people. Here, leaders shot their people to keep the line. It was a different kind of cruelty, one that believed itself righteous. Rimuru's chest tightened. He could wipe the plaza clean in a heartbeat. He could erase demons with a thought, devour their essence, burn the cultists into silence. He could become a storm, but the civilians would be caught in that storm. The soldiers too. And something in Rimuru refused to treat life as acceptable collateral. So he chose restraint. He stepped forward and the air around him shifted. Not dramatically, not with a show of power, but with a quiet alteration of the rules. A barrier formed, thin as a whisper, between the fleeing crowd and the pursuing horrors. The first demon to reach it slammed into invisible force and screeched, claws scraping at nothing. The crowd did not even notice at first. They were too busy running from a nightmare that had always caught them eventually. Rimuru moved again, flowing through broken streets like water finding paths. He touched wounded people as he passed, and their bleeding slowed, their bones knit, their eyes focused. He did not announce himself. He did not demand gratitude. He simply did what he had always done: protect. A child stumbled, tripped over rubble, and would have been swallowed by the crowd's feet. Rimuru's hand extended, and the child was lifted gently, set atop a nearby ledge, eyes blinking in shock. The child looked at him and whispered something, a word that felt like prayer. Rimuru shook his head softly. Not a god. Not here. He reached the plaza where the guardsmen fought. The commissar turned, saw him, and immediately aimed his pistol, as if the sight of an unknown figure in the middle of battle could only mean betrayal. Rimuru lifted his hands, empty. I am not your enemy, he said. The commissar's eyes narrowed. His lips moved, forming the beginning of a denunciation, but he never finished. Because Rimuru looked past him and extended a finger. A thin line of blue light flicked outward. It struck a demon mid-leap and did not explode. It did not scream. It simply stopped existing, erased with surgical precision, like a sentence edited out of a book. The guardsmen froze. Rimuru did not wait for their reaction. He moved along the line, his presence calming the air in a way none of them understood. Each time a demon surged, it met a barrier that redirected it. Each time a cultist raised a blade, the blade dissolved into harmless dust, leaving the cultist staring at his own hands in confused horror. Rimuru could have killed them all. Instead, he disarmed. Mercy was not weakness. Mercy was control. He reached the wounded, those who had fallen behind the line. A soldier missing an arm stared up at him with dull resignation. In this galaxy, wounds like that were often a death sentence or a lifetime of servitude to machinery. Rimuru knelt, placed a hand on the soldier's shoulder, and let healing flow. Flesh regrew, bone reformed. Nerves reconnected like threads being rewoven. The soldier screamed, not in pain but in disbelief. Others saw. Word spread through the line faster than orders. A rumor at first, then a certainty. The guardsmen began to fight with something they had not felt in years. Not duty. Rimuru felt it rising, fragile and dangerous, like a candle in a storm. In the warp, hope was a beacon. Here, hope was a crime against the universe's expectations. He understood that if he stayed, the galaxy would respond. Cruelty did not tolerate exceptions. Systems built on despair treated mercy like infection. Still, he kept moving, building shelters from collapsed structures, shaping walls and roofs with casual magic. He gathered civilians into spaces that felt safe, spaces that smelled like clean air instead of blood. People came hesitantly, distrustful. They expected a price. In their experience, kindness was always transactional. Someone always wanted something. Rimuru asked for nothing. A woman with soot-blackened hands clutched her child and stared at him as if waiting for the demand. When none came, her eyes filled with tears she seemed ashamed to shed. Why, she whispered. Rimuru answered honestly. Because I can. The words were simple, but they landed like thunder. In this world, the powerful rarely helped because they could. They helped because it served doctrine, strategy, or pride. Rimuru served none of those. As hours passed, the assault did not end. It thickened. The warp's influence pressed harder, cracks widening. Demons grew bolder, sensing a new flavor of soul in their hunting grounds. And far above, in orbit and in distant halls, other eyes began to turn toward this hive world. Signals were sent. Reports were written with shaking hands. There is a being here. It is not tainted. It is healing the wounded. It is stopping the demons. The Imperium whispered miracle, and in the same breath, the Imperium whispered heresy. Rimuru did not hear those whispers yet. He was too busy holding a dying city in his hands and trying, gently, to keep it from crumbling. But the galaxy had noticed, and a galaxy that had perfected despair did not look kindly on an unlicensed hope. The first sign was not a ship in the sky or a proclamation. It was a chill that ran through the minds of the faithful, the kind of chill that came when authority approached. Rimuru felt it as a tightening in the air, a sharpening of human emotion into something disciplined and wary. The civilians in his shelters grew quiet. Guardsmen began to glance upward as if expecting judgment to descend. Then the psychers arrived. They came escorted by black-armored figures with rosettes that marked them as something higher than military. Their presence carried the weight of law and fear. Even the commissar who had aimed at Rimuru earlier stood straighter, as if he had been reminded who truly owned his life. The Inquisition did not announce itself with fanfare. It did not need to. It walked into the ruins like a verdict. At their center was a woman in dark robes, her face pale and sharp, eyes hooded by years of suspicion. Around her, acolytes carried relics and instruments that hummed faintly. A sanctioned psyker walked with them, a man with scars around his skull and a metal collar inscribed with prayers. His gaze flicked toward Rimuru and lingered, not with hatred, but with nervous fascination. Rimuru stepped forward to meet them, calm as ever. The shelters behind him were full. People watched from cracks and doorways, as if this moment might decide whether their brief taste of safety would become execution. The Inquisitor studied Rimuru in silence. "You are not registered," she said finally. "You are not sanctioned. You are not identified as Imperial. State your origin." Rimuru considered the question. Any answer would sound like madness. Another world, a different system of magic, a kingdom built on cooperation rather than terror. "I am Rimuru Tempest," he said. "I came here by accident. I am here to stop the demons and protect the people." The Inquisitor's eyes narrowed at the word protect, as if it were suspicious in itself. "Protection is the Emperor's domain," she said. "Mercy is the Emperor's domain. You do not speak his name." Rimuru felt the weight behind that. In this universe, salvation had a monopoly. Hope was branded. Kindness was a controlled substance. "I respect your Emperor," Rimuru replied carefully, "but I am not here to replace anyone. I do not want worship. I do not want control. I only want fewer people to die." A murmur rippled through the crowd. The idea sounded beautiful. It also sounded dangerous. The psyker stepped forward. His hands shook slightly as he raised them. The collar around his neck glowed faintly, wards activating. His mind reached outward like a probe, pushing into Rimuru's presence. Rimuru did not resist. He could have shut the man out. He could have made the attempt painful. Instead, he opened himself, letting the psyker see what was true. A moment passed. The psyker's eyes widened. His breath caught. He recoiled as if he had touched a fire that did not burn but illuminated. "No taint," he whispered, voice cracking. "No warp stain. Nothing." Only he stopped, as if the next word might be blasphemy. Only goodwill. The Inquisitor's expression did not soften. It hardened. "Impossible," she said. Rimuru felt sadness then, a deep and familiar sadness. He had seen it before in rulers who could not imagine kindness without strings, in monsters who could not imagine peace without weakness. In this galaxy, disbelief was safer than hope. The ecclesiarchal representatives arrived shortly after, clergy in red and gold, faces stern, carrying icons that made the air taste of incense and iron. They looked at Rimuru as if he were a rival saint. "The Emperor protects," one of them intoned. "All miracles flow from him. If you claim to heal, you must kneel and declare the source of your power." Rimuru met the priest's gaze. "My power is mine," he said simply. "I do not claim it comes from your Emperor or any other god." A gasp, half outrage, half fear, swept through the onlookers. The priest's lips curled. "Then you are a witch or a demon in disguise." Rimuru sighed softly. "I have fought demons today," he said. "I have saved your soldiers. I have sheltered your civilians. If you still see me as an enemy, then perhaps the label matters more to you than the lives." That sentence was the real heresy, not the lack of worship, the implication that doctrine could be wrong. The Inquisitor stepped closer, voice lower now, almost intimate. "You refuse worship," she said. "You refuse fear. You refuse to rule. And yet people follow you anyway. Do you understand what that means in this Imperium?" Rimuru understood. It meant he represented a kind of authority that did not rely on chains. It meant he was a crack in the foundation. Hope without permission was rebellion. "I do not want your throne," Rimuru said. The Inquisitor's eyes were cold. "That does not matter. Power draws belief. Belief draws the warp draws demons. Your presence is a liability." Rimuru looked past her, to the shelters, to the exhausted faces. People clinging to the first gentle thing they had felt in a lifetime. "They are not a liability," he said. "They are people." The Inquisitor raised a hand. Her acolytes moved, weapons subtly shifting into ready positions. The psyker, still shaken, watched Rimuru with a kind of awe and fear, as if he had glimpsed something that did not fit inside his training. "By the authority of the Inquisition," the Inquisitor said, You will submit to containment for study. If you refuse, you will be treated as a threat. Rimuru's eyes narrowed slightly, not with anger, but with disappointment. Containment, he repeated. For doing what you claim your emperor wants. For saving lives. Do not mock the emperor, the priest snapped. Rimuru's voice remained calm. I am not mocking him. I am questioning you. Silence fell. In that silence, Rimuru felt it again, the galaxy's reflex. The universe did not tolerate mercy that could not be controlled. It did not tolerate salvation that did not reinforce the system. Rimuru could leave. He could vanish into the warp again, seek his own path, avoid becoming a target. He could protect himself, but the people behind him would pay for his absence. He looked at the Inquisitor. I will not submit to a cage, he said. But I will not harm you. I will continue protecting this world as long as it can be saved. The Inquisitor's expression did not change, yet something in her eyes flickered. Pity, perhaps, or calculation. Then she turned, speaking to her attendants in a voice meant to carry. Mark him. Observe him. Prepare escalation protocols. Inform orbit. Rimuru felt the meaning of that. In this Imperium, escalation was not negotiation. It was annihilation. He watched them leave, their authority trailing behind like a shadow. The civilians exhaled as if they had been holding their breath for decades. Rimuru stood in the ruins and realized the true crime he had committed. He had shown a dying world that mercy could exist without chains, and now the chains were coming. The first strike from chaos came like a compliment. A ripple in the warp above the hive, a flare of color that should not exist in a polluted sky. From it descended figures too beautiful to be real, their voices singing with promises. They walked through the ruins as if the world were a stage built for their amusement. Slaanesh's demons did not attack at first. They approached the shelters Rimuru had built and offered relief. Food that tasted like childhood, sleep without nightmares, touch that erased loneliness. They moved among the desperate like priests of pleasure, and people, starving for anything that felt human, reached toward them. Rimuru sensed it immediately, the way the warp twisted kindness into a hook. He moved through the crowd, and where his presence touched the demon's enchantment, it unraveled. Not with force, but with clarity. The false joy dissolved into dust. The demons turned their eyes on him, smiling. Give them what they want, they purred. Let them drown in sweetness. Let them forget. You could be adored. You could be worshipped. You could be everything. Rimuru looked at the civilians, at their hollow cheeks and trembling hands. I will not drug their pain, he said. I will end it. The demons laughed, delighted by the challenge. They pressed harder, shaping visions directly into Rimuru's mind. A throne made of longing, a world where he never had to carry responsibility again. Friends who never died because he could rewrite reality to keep them smiling forever. For a moment, Rimuru felt the temptation, not because he craved it, but because he knew how exhausting it was to always be strong. Ciel spoke within him. Temptation vector identified. Emotional fatigue exploited. Recommend reaffirming core directive. Rimuru inhaled slowly. My core directive, he repeated, and the words anchored him. Choose compassion. He turned the demon's own method against them. He let them feel his will, not as a shout, but as a steady pressure. His mercy was not soft. It was disciplined. It was an unyielding refusal to let others be reduced to appetites. The demons faltered. Their glamour cracked. Their bodies flickered, and Rimuru reached out, devouring the pattern of their influence, not their essence, but the mechanism. He learned the way their seduction latched onto neurotransmitters and soul resonance. Ciel confirmed. Mechanism integrated. Immunity to similar seduction effects increased. Slaanesh's strike had failed. Next came rot. The air grew warm and wet. The ruins sprouted fungus in minutes, thick mats crawling over metal. Flies appeared in swarms so dense they blotted out lamps. The sick began to cough, and their coughs carried spores. Nurgle's gifts arrived with a twisted tenderness. The infected felt less afraid. The dying smiled as if surrender were comfort. Rimuru walked into the plague without hesitation. His body shifted, becoming a filtration system more complex than any machine. He drew the spores into himself, tasted them, understood them, and rewrote them into harmless matter. He touched the sick and their lungs cleared. He touched the dying and their fever broke. A great unclean one emerged from the warped tier above the city, massive and jovial, its laughter shaking dust from buildings. It raised its arms like a parent welcoming a child. Join the family, it boomed. You heal because you love. We love too. We love so much we never let go. Rimuru looked up at it, and for the first time his calm carried an edge. Your love is possession, he said. Mine is choice. He extended a hand. The plague around him reversed, not simply cleansed, but analyzed. The mechanisms of decay became fuel for his own evolution. He grew more resistant, more precise, more capable. The great unclean one's smile wavered as it sensed something wrong. It had offered rot. Rimuru had eaten the lesson. Ciel spoke again. Warp decay vectors converted. Adaptive immunity expanded. Recommend counterpressure to close local contamination zone. Rimuru moved, and a dome of clean air formed over the shelters, pushing the rot outward like a tide being held back by a wall of glass. Nurgle's strike had failed. Then came schemes. The cultists changed tactics. They stopped charging. They infiltrated. They spread rumors that Rimuru was an alien trick, that his shelters were traps. They whispered that the Inquisition would purge anyone who accepted his help. They planted evidence of warp taint near his barriers, hoping to frame him. Tisenchi's influence was invisible, a web of paranoia. Rimuru listened to the whispers moving through the crowd. He watched how fear spread faster than any disease. He understood that this was the most dangerous attack yet, because it did not need demons. It used humans against themselves. He responded with transparency. He gathered people in the shelters and spoke simply, without grandeur. He explained what he knew. He admitted what he did not. He promised nothing he could not deliver. He gave them information, choices, agency. In a galaxy built on enforced ignorance, agency was revolutionary. The web of paranoia tightened, tried to twist his words, but each twist was met with clear correction. Each lie was met with visible action. A rumor that he hoarded supplies died when he opened storehouses. A rumor that he sacrificed the sick died when the sick walked out healed. Ciel's analysis accelerated. Deception patterns identified. Predictive modeling of misinformation vectors underway. Counter-narrative deployment optimized. Rimuru did not think of it as counter-narrative. He thought of it as truth, calmly repeated until it held. Tisenchi's strike had failed. Then rage came again, because rage was always the final language of a universe that could not tolerate being refused. The sky split with a roar. A blood-red rift tore open above the hive, and from it fell warriors made of pure violence, axes raised, bodies wreathed in chains and gore. Khorne's demons did not whisper. They did not tempt. They simply wanted to turn the shelters into slaughterhouses because slaughter was worship. The guardsmen tried to form line. They died in seconds. Rimuru stepped forward. He could have erased them. He could have annihilated the rift itself. But he had learned something in the warp. Killing demons in this universe was like punching water. It satisfied rage but did not solve the flood. So Rimuru fought differently. He moved like a tide, flowing around strikes, absorbing impacts, redirecting momentum. Each demon that hit him found its violence, swallowed, converted. He did not meet rage with rage. He met it with inevitability. His body adapted mid-battle. Each blow taught him. Each scream fed his understanding. He began to anticipate attacks before they formed, not through prophecy, but through analysis of warp intention. Ciel confirmed. Combat adaptation progressing. Warp aggression signatures mapped. Countermeasures increasing in efficiency. The demons began to slow. Their rage, meant to be endless, met a wall that did not break and did not feed them. They were accustomed to enemies who fought back with hatred, because hatred was fuel. Rimuru denied them fuel. A bloodthirster emerged, towering, wings spread, sword like a guillotine. It bellowed a challenge that shook the hive's foundations. Rimuru looked up. "I do not want to kill you," he said, and his voice carried through the chaos like a bell. "But I will not let you harm them." The bloodthirster charged. Rimuru met it with a single focus technique. He did not blast it. He did not tear it apart. He opened his skill like a mouth and consumed the concept of its violence, stripping away the warp reinforcement that made it real. The bloodthirster staggered as if suddenly unsure of its own existence. Its form wavered. Rimuru followed, not with cruelty but with finality. He sealed it, compressing its essence into a contained fragment, locking it away from the battlefield. The rift above the hive flickered, destabilized, and began to close, deprived of the emotional feast it craved. Khorne's strike had failed. In the warp, 4 great hungers watched through countless eyes. Slaanesh tasted a soul that would not crave. Nurgle tasted a body that would not rot. T-Sanch tasted a mind that would not be led. Khorne tasted a foe that would not rage. Each attempt did what chaos had always done. It pushed. And each push made Rimuru stronger, wiser, more prepared. The dark gods began to understand something that had not occurred to them for millennia. They were used to corrupting, used to breaking, used to turning resistance into fuel. They had never faced an ecosystem that adapted to gods. Rimuru stood amid ruined streets, shelters intact behind him, and looked up at the sky where the rift had been. If they kept coming, he would keep learning. And in that quiet certainty, chaos began to feel something dangerously unfamiliar. A flicker of caution. They arrived with fire. Drop pods screamed through the ash-stained sky, trailing flame like falling meteors. The ground shook as they struck, cracking ferrocrete, throwing dust in shock waves. For the civilians huddled in Rimuru's shelters, the sound was a new kind of terror, not the chaotic shriek of demons, the controlled violence of the Imperium. The pods opened and giants stepped out. The salamanders. Their armor was dark green, scaled like a drake's hide, marked with flame sigils. Their eyes burned behind lenses. They moved with the heavy certainty of living weapons. In their wake, heat shimmered from the barrels of flame weapons and melt-a-guns, tools designed to erase monsters and anything near them. To the guardsmen it was salvation. They straightened, whispered prayers, and felt their courage return. To the civilians, it was judgment. Many had heard stories. Angels of death who saved worlds by burning them clean. The salamanders formed a perimeter with practiced efficiency. At their center walked their captain, helmet off, face scarred like volcanic rock. His gaze swept the ruins, noted the unnatural stillness around the shelters, the absence of warp distortion inside a city that should have been drowning in it. Then his eyes found Rimuru. He did not see a man. He saw a presence. Rimuru stood calmly, unarmored, almost ordinary, yet radiating the quiet weight of something that had survived the warp and returned unchanged. The captain raised a hand, halting his squad. "Identify yourself," he said, voice like grinding stone. Rimuru inclined his head. "Rimuru Tempest. I am protecting the people here." The captain's gaze sharpened. "Protecting them from what?" "From demons," Rimuru replied. "From cultists. From despair." The salamanders shifted slightly at that last word. They understood despair. They had been forged in it. One of the Marines stepped forward, a heavy flamer cradled like a sermon. His voice was blunt. "We were told there is an unknown entity on this world. Possibly a demon prince. Possibly a Xenos psyker. Possibly worse." Rimuru's expression did not change. "I am not a demon," he said. "I am not here to conquer. I do not want your people to die." Silence hung for a moment, heavy as the smoke. Then the captain spoke again. "The Inquisition is watching," he said. "If you are what they suspect, this planet will burn." Rimuru looked past the Marines to the shelters, to the thin faces pressed against openings, eyes wide with frightened hope. "That is why I am staying," he said. "Because burning it would kill them." The captain studied him, and in that study there was something rare in Astartes. Not uncertainty, but consideration. The salamanders were different from other chapters. They were still weapons, still brutal, still loyal to an empire of iron. But they remembered the faces of civilians. They were known to stand between fire and the helpless, even when doctrine suggested otherwise. The captain took a step closer. "How are you closing the rifts?" Rimuru answered honestly. "By stabilizing the area, by sealing the distortions, and by refusing to let fear feed them." A Marine snorted. "Fear feeds them," Rimuru nodded. "The warp responds to emotion. Despair strengthens it. Hope can also attract it. I am trying to reduce the feast." The captain's eyes narrowed. "That sounds like heresy." Rimuru's voice remained calm. "But it is true." A distant explosion rolled across the hive. The air shimmered. A new warp tier began to form above a nearby district, a swelling wound in the sky. Demons began to pour through, their laughter audible even over the gunfire. The salamanders snapped into motion, weapons raising. The captain looked at Rimuru. "If you are lying," he said, "I will kill you myself." Rimuru met his gaze. "If you burn the shelters," Rimuru replied, I will stop you. The words should have been a challenge. Instead, they sounded like a boundary, spoken without hatred. The captain held Rimuru's gaze for a long heartbeat. Then he turned sharply. We purge the rift, he ordered. We protect the civilians. No indiscriminate fire near the shelters. His Marines hesitated only a fraction, then obeyed. They moved into the district like a tide of controlled flame. Bolters roared, tearing demons apart. Flamers washed the streets in cleansing fire, but the salamanders were careful, adjusting angles, using their own bodies as shields to prevent civilians from being caught in the blaze. Rimuru moved with them. The Marines expected him to fight like a psyker, hurling lightning, bending minds. Instead, he fought like a force of nature that had learned compassion. He placed barriers that redirected demon charges into kill zones. He absorbed warp attacks that would have shredded human soldiers. He healed wounded guardsmen mid-battle, not with rituals, but with a touch that made flesh remember its proper shape. The salamanders noticed. They could not ignore it. A Marine took a clawed strike meant for a child who had been trapped in rubble. The blow dented ceramite and would have crushed a human. The Marine staggered, and Rimuru was there, steadying him, sealing the crack in armor, easing the pain beneath. The Marine stared at Rimuru, stunned. Why? He growled. Because you were protecting him, Rimuru said, nodding toward the child. The Marine looked at the child, then back at Rimuru, and something in his expression shifted. Not trust. Not yet. But recognition. The battle intensified. A demon prince emerged, towering, wings of smoke, eyes full of hungry intelligence. It pointed at Rimuru and screamed his name as if it were a curse. The salamanders reacted instantly, forming a firing line. The captain lifted his weapon. Rimuru raised a hand, stopping them. Wait, he said. The captain bristled. You do not give orders here. Rimuru's voice remained gentle. I am not ordering. I am asking. Let me handle it. The captain hesitated, then nodded once. A small concession, but a concession. Rimuru stepped forward, facing the demon prince. The creature hissed, promising pain, promising eternal war, promising that hope was always punished. Rimuru listened. Then he replied. I know this universe punishes compassion, he said. I am here anyway. He extended his senses, and the demon prince's shape became data. He saw the warp threads that held it together, the emotional anchors, the cult prayers feeding it. He did not destroy it with brute force. He unraveled it like a knot, pulling the strands apart until the creature dissolved into harmless mist. The salamanders watched in silence. When the mist cleared, the captain stepped closer, eyes narrowed. You fight like an ally, he said. But you speak like someone outside the Imperium. I am outside it, Rimuru replied. But I am not outside humanity. For a moment, the captain looked almost weary. This galaxy does not reward that, he said. Rimuru looked back toward the shelters, toward the civilians who were still alive because someone had refused to accept the galaxy's rules. Then we will have to change what it rewards, Rimuru said. And beside him, for the first time, angels of death stood with a gentle king, uncertain but unwilling to burn the light he had kindled. The order came from orbit like a blade falling. Rimuru did not hear it through vox channels. He felt it in the way the salamanders stiffened, in the way their captain's jaw tightened as if he had bitten down on rage. He saw it in the sudden urgency of their movements, the way they began to herd civilians with a speed that was not only tactical, but desperate. Then the captain approached Rimuru, helmet under his arm, eyes dark. Exterminatus has been authorized, he said. This world is deemed compromised. The Inquisition believes the risk is unacceptable. Rimuru stared at him. Compromised, he repeated softly. The captain's voice was harsh. They think your presence is the compromise. They think the shelters are a congregation. They think hope itself is the bait that will draw more warp intrusion. Rimuru looked toward the sky, toward the smoke clouds that hid the stars. Somewhere above, ships waited with weapons designed to erase continents. How long? Rimuru asked. Minutes, the captain said. Maybe less. They do not debate once they decide. The salamanders began evacuating with grim efficiency, moving civilians toward the only functional spaceport district. But the hive held millions. Rimuru's shelters held thousands. Even if every Marine carried a child in each arm, they could not move enough people in time. Rimuru's mind remained calm, but something inside him hardened. No, he said. The captain blinked. No, Rimuru's voice was steady, almost gentle. "I will not allow it." The captain's expression tightened. "You cannot stop a fleet." Rimuru looked at him. "I can try." For a heartbeat, the captain looked like he might argue. Then he glanced at the shelters, at the civilians who had begun to understand what the Marines were doing. Panic rose like a tide. People clutched one another. Some fell to their knees, praying to the Emperor, to anyone, to the very air. The captain's voice lowered. "If you interfere, they will call you the enemy. They will fire anyway, and we will be ordered to kill you." Rimuru nodded. "Then you will have to decide what you obey," Rimuru said. The captain's eyes flashed, and for a moment the mask of the superhuman warrior cracked enough to reveal a man burdened by duty. "We are loyal," he said. "So am I," Rimuru replied, looking back toward the people. "Loyal to them." The first orbital strike began as a distant brightness, a star blooming behind the clouds. Then the air vibrated with a descending roar. The hive trembled as if the planet itself flinched. Rimuru moved. He rose into the sky without spectacle, simply stepping upward as if the air had become a staircase. Above the hive, he spread his awareness, feeling the incoming fire like a spear of heat and annihilation. It was not just a weapon. It was a statement. "We would rather kill everyone than lose control." Rimuru extended his hands and formed a barrier. Not a shield like steel. A boundary like law. The orbital lance struck. Light turned white. The barrier bent, shimmering, straining, but it held. The heat washed over it like a sun pressed against glass. Rimuru felt it sear through his defenses, burn into his essence. Pain flared, sudden and sharp, the kind of pain he had not felt since his earliest days, when survival had been uncertain. His body adapted instantly, layers forming, concepts of heat and force being cataloged and countered. Ciel's voice was calm, clinical. Orbital energy output extreme. Barrier integrity holding at 62%. Adaptive reinforcement in progress. Recommend evacuation acceleration. Rimuru did not answer. He was busy bleeding in silence. Below, the shelters shook. Civilians screamed. The salamanders watched the sky, stunned. They had fought demons and tyrannids and traitors, but they had never seen someone stand between a planet and its own execution. A second land strike followed, then a third, each one hammering the barrier. Rimuru's form flickered, edges dissolving under the pressure, then reforming. His slime body, so endlessly resilient, began to show strain, not in cracks, but in the way his light dimmed. He felt the temptation then, the easy solution. If he let the barrier fall, his pain would end. His effort would end. The universe would return to its grim equilibrium. But the people below would die. Rimuru pushed the thought away and focused on what mattered. He split his attention, creating dozens, then hundreds of parallel bodies, each one a fragment of himself moving through the hive. He lifted rubble. He opened sealed tunnels. He guided crowds through safe routes. He carried the injured as gently as a parent. Each fragment of him worked while the core held the sky. The salamanders joined him, their captain barking orders, turning their disciplined brutality into a rescue operation rather than a purge. They used their bulk to shield civilians from stampedes and collapsing debris. They burned through blocked corridors not to kill, but to clear paths. Still, it was not enough. The hive's scale was monstrous. Millions could not be moved in minutes. Rimuru made a harder choice. He began to reshape the environment itself. Streets flowed, buildings softened, walls shifted, creating direct corridors to the spaceport. He carved a path through the hive like a river carving stone. The city resisted. It was not alive, but it was built to endure. Rimuru's power pushed against countless tons of ferrocrete and metal. He felt the weight of the hive as if he were lifting a mountain with bare hands. Above, the orbital strikes did not stop. The Inquisition was committed. The barrier groaned. Rimuru's senses blurred under the constant pressure. Pain became a drumbeat. And then something changed. A voice came through the vox, cutting through static and prayers. The Inquisitor's voice. Unknown entity, cease interference. You are obstructing Imperial justice. Withdraw and submit or be destroyed. Rimuru heard it faintly through the barrier, like a distant echo. He answered anyway, voice carried through magic and will. If your justice requires the death of innocence, he said, then your justice is cruelty wearing a crown. There was a pause, as if the fleet had never been spoken to like that. Then the strikes intensified. The barrier began to fail. Rimuru felt it like bones breaking even though he had no bones. The edge of the shield cracked, letting a line of fire slip through toward the hive. Rimuru reacted instantly, thrusting his body into the gap. He absorbed the lance's edge into himself, taking the full burn. For a moment, he was nothing but a silhouette of light being consumed. Below, people looked up and saw the unthinkable. A god bleed, not from battle pride or wrath, but from refusal. A being who chose pain so mortals could live. The salamander's captain watched with clenched fists, his eyes reflecting the white fire above. He whispered not as an order, but as a prayer. Hold, Rimuru held. Minutes passed like lifetimes. Enough people reached the spaceport to fill transports beyond capacity. Enough people escaped to make the difference between extinction and survival. At last, Rimuru's barrier collapsed, not because he surrendered, but because the fleet's fire had been relentless. But by then, the shelters were mostly empty. Rimuru fell from the sky, his form dim, his consciousness heavy. The salamanders caught him before he hit the ground, their massive hands surprisingly careful. The captain stared down at him. "Why did you do it?" he asked, voice rough. Rimuru's eyes opened slowly. He smiled faintly, exhausted. "Because they mattered," he said. In orbit, the fleet prepared another strike. But now, for the first time, the Imperium had witnesses who had seen mercy stand against Exterminatus. And that memory would be harder to burn away than any hive city. Rimuru recovered faster than any mortal could comprehend, but recovery did not mean peace. The hive world had survived the immediate execution, yet the verdict still hung above it like a guillotine. The Inquisition would not forget. Chaos would not withdraw. The galaxy would not forgive a light that refused to be extinguished. Rimuru understood then that defending one world was not enough. If he remained only a shield, chaos would simply go around him. If he remained only a healer, the warp would keep bleeding through 1,000 other wounds. The problem was not one siege. The problem was the ocean. So he chose to step back into the ocean, not to conquer it, to contain it. He stood at the site of the largest rift, a wound in reality still pulsing above the ruined district. The salamanders watched from a distance, weapons ready but useless against a decision this large. The captain approached, stopping a few steps away. "If you enter that," he said, "you may not return." Rimuru looked at the rift, at the darkness beyond it that tasted of whispers. "I have to try," he replied. "If I can seal even one source, fewer people will die." The captain's jaw tightened. "The warp is hell." Rimuru's smile was faint. "Then I will go gently," he said, and stepped forward. The rift swallowed him, and the world's physics fell away again. The warp surged around him, thick with hunger. Demons sensed him immediately, their attention snapping toward him like a field of predators smelling fresh blood. But Rimuru was not fresh anymore. He carried adaptations now. Immunities, maps of corruption mechanisms. He carried the memory of orbital fire and the faces of civilians. He moved through the warp like a quiet current, not shining like a beacon, but folding his presence into calm neutrality. Demons still found him, because power drew attention, but their first strikes met a being who had learned their language. A demon world formed ahead, a landscape built from twisted worship, mountains shaped like screaming faces, rivers of molten desire. Cult nexuses pulsed like tumors, feeding the realm with prayers from real space. Rimuru did not attempt to destroy the realm. He knew he could not kill the chaos gods. Their roots were not in places. Their roots were in mind. So he attacked the bridges. He found the cult nexus and reached into it with a skill like surgery. He severed the threads that connected mortal belief to warp manifestation, not by erasing belief, but by disrupting the channel. The cult's prayers became echoes that did not reach their patron. The demon world trembled, its sky dimmed. Its inhabitants shrieked as their reinforcement faded. Rimuru sealed the nexus, compressing it into a contained knot of energy and meaning, then casting it into a pocket space where it could not feed. Ciel's voice spoke within him, steady. Nexus severance successful. Local warp stability improved by 14%. Recommend repeating pattern across additional nodes. Rimuru did. He traveled from wound to wound, from realm to realm, each one a different flavor of horror. A garden of rot where every flower exhaled despair. A palace of excess where pleasure was weaponized into slavery. A fortress of rage built from endless war cries. A labyrinth of schemes that rearranged itself each time it was observed. In each place, Rimuru did not declare war. He performed containment. He closed rift. He dismantled altars. He unmade rituals mid-chant, not with explosions, but with quiet erasure. Demons attacked. They always attack. He adapted. The more they fought him, the more he learned how their forms were sustained, how their weapons were shaped by emotion, how their immortality depended on narratives repeated in mortal minds. Rimuru began to understand something terrifying. Chaos was not simply evil gods in a distant realm. Chaos was the reflection of suffering made unavoidable. It was the echo of every time a human being was crushed until only rage remained, every time hope was betrayed until only despair felt safe. To diminish chaos, you had to diminish the despair that fed it. Rimuru felt the attention of the dark gods again, heavier now, focused, irritated. He had entered their domain and refused to play the expected role. He did not seek to dethrone them. He did not bargain. He did not kneel. He simply reduced their influence, node by node, like someone quietly turning off the valves of a vast machine. For the first time in ages, the warp's tides shifted in pockets of calm. Not pure, not safe, but quieter. On real space worlds, strange things happened. Cult rituals failed. Demon incursions weakened. Warp storms flickered and thinned. Ships that would have been lost to madness emerged with crews shaken but alive. And people noticed. In the underhives and void decks, whispers began. There is a protector, a saint who does not demand prayer, a demon who kills demons, a gentle god. The Imperium tried to suppress the rumors because uncontrolled hope was dangerous. But suppression only made the stories spread in secret, carried like contraband warmth. Rimuru felt those whispers in the warp as faint currents of belief. Belief had weight here. Even small faith could become a foothold. It was dangerous. If people believed in him too strongly, he might become something else, shaped by their expectations, trapped by their narratives. He did not want that. He did not want to replace one god with another. So he moved carefully, avoiding becoming an idol. Yet every time he saved a ship, sealed a rift, rescued a world from a ritual, the galaxy learned a new possibility. That chaos could be resisted without becoming chaos. That the warp could be diminished, not by pure force, but by refusing to feed it. The dark gods responded with renewed fury. Entire hosts gathered, four tides converging, determined to crush the anomaly before it became precedent. Rimuru faced them not as one warrior against an army, but as an adaptive system against a predictable hunger. They struck with temptation, rot, scheme, and rage all at once. Rimuru's mind stayed calm. He did not outmuscle them. He did not outgod them. He simply continued doing what they could not comprehend. He kept growing. And each time he sealed another nexus, each time he closed another wound, something stirred across the galaxy. Something that had been dormant for 10,000 years. Not rebellion against the Imperium. Rebellion against despair itself. Because if a gentle king could step into hell and come back holding the line, then maybe the future did not have to belong entirely to darkness. Rimuru did not build an empire. The galaxy expected it. The Inquisition feared it. Chaos prepared for it. In the grimdark future, power always tried to become a throne because thrones were the easiest shape for power to hold. But Rimuru had never wanted a throne. He remembered Tempest, not as a monument to his authority, but as a proof that cooperation could outlast fear. And he remembered the Hive world, the first imperial world he had touched, where kindness had been treated like contraband. So he chose a different architecture. He built sanctuaries. Not massive fortresses that would invite crusades, but small, stubborn lights placed in the cracks of war zones. Stations hidden in asteroid fields where refugees could breathe without chains around their throats. Ruined manufactorums turned into clinics. Derelict void ships converted into moving shelters that drifted through contested space like quiet prayers. He did not call them kingdoms. He called them places to survive. The salamanders, reluctant at first, became the first to understand the function. They did not pledge to him. They did not worship. But they began to quietly escort convoys to his sanctuaries because they had seen him bleed against Exterminatus. They had seen what it meant when someone powerful treated civilians as ends rather than tools. Other chapters heard rumors and dismissed them. Some laughed, some threatened, some watched. The Imperium called him naive, a Xenos anomaly, a psychic hazard, a morale destabilizer, a potential rival cult. Documents were written with careful language to justify future elimination. Inquisitors argued in chambers full of incense and paranoia, asking the same question in different forms. How do you control a miracle that refuses Chain's chaos called him a threat? Not because he was stronger than the dark gods. He was not. Not because he could kill them. He could not. But because he had proven a more dangerous lesson than any weapon. That their influence could be diminished. That despair was not inevitable. Rimuru understood the limits. He could not save every world. He could not heal an empire built on cruelty in a single lifetime, even if his lifetime stretched beyond comprehension. There would always be wars he arrived too late to stop. Children he could not reach. Ships that vanished into storms too vast for his barriers. He carried those losses quietly. Not as justification to become harsh, but as fuel to keep going. He learned to move through the galaxy like water through cracks, never offering a target large enough to be easily crushed. When the Inquisition came hunting, he vanished into the warp and reappeared where he was needed. When chaos gathered armies, he avoided their mass and dismantled their channels, starving the invasion before it fully formed. When a world was marked for purge, he rescued as many as he could, then let the planet fall if there was no other way, because sometimes mercy was choosing who could live when you could not save everyone. That truth hurt. It always hurt. But he refused to let pain become cynicism. In some sanctuaries, people began to tell stories. Not sermons, not doctrine, but stories. A gentle ruler who arrived without banners. A protector who asked no prayer. A being who did not demand loyalty, only asked that they help one another while they could. The Imperium tried to crush those stories, yet stories are harder to burn than bodies. The more the authorities denied him, the more the whispers felt like forbidden warmth. Rimuru watched it all with wary compassion. He did not want to become a god of mankind. He did not want to replace the Emperor in anyone's heart. He knew what belief did in the warp. He knew that worship could shape him into something he did not choose. So he taught his survivors a different kind of faith. Faith in one another. Faith that small acts mattered. Faith that you could protect without owning. In a galaxy where every institution insisted humanity was only safe under a boot heel, Rimuru's sanctuaries became a quiet rebuttal. Not utopias, not paradise, just places where the air did not taste like despair. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, that mattered. A guardsman who survived because Rimuru healed him would hesitate before executing a civilian for panicking. A factory worker who lived in a sanctuary would smuggle food to refugees instead of selling them out. A priest who saw a child saved without prayer might, in secret, pray differently, not for obedience, but for gentleness. Tiny changes. But the warp listened to tiny changes. The warp was fed by the emotional weather of billions. If even a fraction of that weather shifted, the tides would shift too. Rimuru remained what he had always been, a former nobody who chose to protect everyone he could reach. And in the grimdark future, where war was endless and cruelty was called necessary, that choice became the most radical act of all. Not a victory, a persistence, a small, stubborn light refusing to go out.